What is good, Stackers University? Dr. Stacker back and feeling good for vacation. And I'm really going to try to not make this any harder than it has to be because it doesn't have to be this hard. Wait, if it wasn't hard, you wouldn't appreciate it. No, that didn't sound right either. Let me try that again. I know it can feel like too big of a task for you, but you can do it. Wow, that almost sounded worse. Sometimes precious metal investing can feel like a hard and bumpy ride. Okay, clearly I'm making this harder than it needs to be. Oops. How about I start with a story instead? I'll make it a quickie. Never mind. Aesop's fable of the fox and the grape tells a story of a hungry fox who really wanted some grapes that were hanging high on a vine. After multiple attempts to reach the vine, he realized that he couldn't reach it. And not willing to put any more effort and definitely not wanting to admit defeat, the fox convinced himself and said, "Oh, they're not even ripe yet. I don't even need any sour grapes." Too often, this is exactly the behavior I see from people. They get frustrated and speak disparaging of things that they can't attain, understand, or be patient enough to reap the benefits from. While I've been traveling and not putting out a lot of videos, I've noticed a shift in the sentiment around here on YouTube. I notice how the sentiment has turned negative. I can always tell because you start seeing video topics about how bad things are, the market being rigged, manipulation, the standard playbook when they can't sell you on hype and FOMO. If you've been with the good old Doc Stacker, this downturn wasn't a surprise at all. I've been talking about a pullback in prices for a couple of months. I even warned you that in May, we would see some seasonal weaknesses. So none of this should be a shock to us at Stackers University. Why? Because we understand that successful investing is hard and it's not as simple as just buy it, and if it drops 50 cents, buy more and just keep buying. If you want to continue to maximize and increase your success and get the most metals for your money, you have to do things differently. You have to do the hard work of learning the market, or you'll be like the fox sour grapes when you don't find success. Shout out to J-Rad because his comments what pushed me to put this video together. He wrote, "Mistake number 2, historical charts assume that markets will always remain rational. If it's as simple as TA, technical analysis, everyone would be a billionaire." This video isn't about challenging J-Rad's point about technical analysis. It's to underscore the importance of multiple indicators to help you understand where the market is going. A few videos back, I covered the difference between convergence and confluence. In a nutshell, the difference is that convergence is the act of moving towards union or uniformity, while confluence is a place where two or more things come together, like when we see in a river or a stream. When it comes to precious metal investing, we have to learn the difference between convergence and confluence and how to use those indicators that are converging or starting to come together as like an early notification system of a market direction for us, while at the same time using the confluence, or when things are actually in alignment, as indicators to alert us that the market has shifted. J-Rad's comment really speaks to one of the biggest challenges when it comes to precious metal investing, and that is trying to understand the complexity of what really drives demand and moves the market, because he's right. It's not all about technical analysis. As an investor, technical analysis is just one of the tools you have available to you, similar to like a handyman or handy woman with their toolbox. You wouldn't trust a handy person who only carries screwdrivers. You don't want to be an investor who only uses one tool or indicator, because each tool does something different. As investors, we have to acknowledge and start with the understanding that the base market fundamentals demand for each metal is different. We all know this. We all know that silver, with this industrial application accounting for more than 50% of its usage or demand, is fundamentally different from gold, which is more than 90% of its demand comes from investors, central banks, and jewelry, which in places like India and China, jewelry is one of the ways people actually store their wealth. We have to remind ourselves that these different base level demands fundamentally drive how the markets move. In a nutshell, while both serve as commodities and financial asset, gold more than silver responds to political inputs, supply and demand pressures, macroeconomic conditions, as well as financial markets conditions very differently. This is what makes it so hard for us to really understand the markets. Don't freak out or have a trauma flashback, but I want you to think back to high school algebra. Do you remember that really stupid quadratic equation we all had to learn? Remember x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of blah, 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 blah. I promise we won't do any math here, but I want you to notice a few things about the equation. You see how the b coefficient is treated? At one point, it's a negative b, but then it can be added or subtracted, and finally, b is squared. And then notice how a is multiplied by c and then 4, but in the denominator is multiplied by 2. I bring this up because too often we like to think about markets as a simple linear equation like y equals mx plus b. But in reality, The way the market moves is far more complicated, and it looks more like the quadratic equation I showed you. No matter how much someone tries to convince you that we are just waiting for one thing, we have to remind ourselves that these markets are complex like the quadratic equation. This is why I say to you that we need to have a confluence of variables, and that is what determines where things really are. Lately, you've been hearing people say things about we need yields to go down and the interest rates need to fall, or the DXY needs to go lower, or supply and demand technicals. And while all of those things are important, when you actually do the research, you find that they are distinct periods where each of those factors directly impact gold and silver prices, and at times they don't. In fact, one of the biggest drivers of gold prices only have a moderate correlation, meaning just slightly more than 50% of the time, they actually drive the price up or down. Specifically, let's look at the DXY and gold prices, as recently that has become like the go-to indicator for folks trying to determine price movement. When you run statistics or simply just look at this chart, while there's a negative correlation between gold prices and the DXY, there are also distinct times where that relationship completely breaks down, meaning there are times when the DXY goes up and prices go up as well. In this study, and I'm not even going to try to pronounce the author's name, the researchers find that the question of when gold can be a hedge against dollar exchange rate and when it cannot, and that actually is extreme conditions can have a more significant impact. Did you catch that word again? You know, the one I say all the time, conditions. Let's quickly go back and look at that quadratic equation again, because I want you to start viewing the markets like this equation, which in a nutshell means that it's complicated. As an investor, be it stocks or metals, there isn't one thing that is you're going to find that truly drives the market, because markets are also strongly influenced by people, and people aren't always rational. The more that you learn to see markets as a complex mathematical equation, like the quadratic equation, where sometimes a variable can be more important than others, given the market conditions at that moment, and the more patient you can be as an investor, the more successful you will be. Okay, I know it may feel like I made you take like 3 rights instead of just making a left turn, but there's a reason for this in terms of lessons and takeaways, especially as I've learned over the years that there are maybe 3 concepts that you need to remember and hold on to as a successful investor. Starting with point number 1, markets are complex and they even contradict themselves. Successful investors see the complexity of the market and learn the impact of each variable, and that it can actually change depending on the market condition. In some ways, understanding the market conditions is more important than understanding all the variables that drive the actual market. Number 2, markets are the hardest to predict in the short term. In fact, if you can get it right 50-60% of the time, that would actually be amazing. This means that stackers must learn how to be a little almost double-minded of sorts, where we have the ability to assess the markets in the short term as well as the long term, which can often be conflicting positions, which is the third point I want you to remember. Number 3, you are allowed to be bullish and bearish at the same time. Yes, it is possible to be short-term bearish even though you're long-term bullish and vice versa. I've made a few purchases this year, but I've spent most of the first half of this year sitting on the sidelines because in the short term, I've been bearish on metal prices, even though long-term, I'm very bullish. Over the next 3 years, I believe metals and mining companies are going to do amazing things. But over the next 3 months, I think prices will continue to slide for a number of reasons. Remember in the quadratic equation, while it's a negative B, it's also sometimes added or subtracted in one instance. But at the same time, in the same equation, that B is squared. So at different points in these markets, you're going to see market drivers and indicators behave in similar ways. There will be a time where the DXY goes up and metal prices actually go up with it. All you can do as an investor is fill your toolbox with a variety of tools or skills that will help you navigate the markets, understanding they are complex equations that almost don't make sense. All of this reminds me of a quote from G.K. Chesterton, where he says, "The real problem with this world of ours is not that it's an unreasonable world, nor even that it is a reasonable one. The commonest kind of trouble is that it is nearly reasonable, but not quite." While he was referencing the world as a whole, I think this is the best description of what it means to be an investor, especially in precious metals. It truly is a market that is nearly reasonable, but not quite, which is why we have to learn and lean on a variety of tools like technical analysis, market sentiment, macroeconomics, political conditions, etc., and use those pieces of information to help us better assess what's going on. Being a precious metal investor is no doubt one of the hardest markets to navigate. In the comments section, do you think gold and silver prices will go higher or lower in the short term? What do you think will drive those prices? And if you're an A+ student, simply put that in the comments to let everyone know that you always stack smarter and never stop learning.